What's up guys, I'm Hamilton Keats and you're watching Azarus TV. Today I'm with Jeff Keys and we're going to be talking about how you can build better financial habits step by step. Jeff is the founder of Build Habits That Stick. He's a practitioner in organizational psychology and has been researching how to build better habits for many years. Let's dive right in. Hey Jeff, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Hamilton. How are you?
Good, thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So today we want to talk about how to build better habits, and you've got 7 steps for our viewers.
So the first and probably one of the most key things that most people don't do is to focus on the very first action in the habit that you're trying to create. People want to do something like start going to the gym, they want to start losing weight, they want to do what have you, but they focus on either the outcome, I want to be skinny or I want to be strong, or they focus on the habit as a whole, like I need to go and I want to work out for 90 minutes, I want to eat, so many calories per day, whatever, the larger thing. And that tends to fail for a variety of reasons. So the key thing is to figure out what's the very small, very first step in that sequence that needs to happen that day, and you focus your habit efforts on that one thing.
Where most people go wrong is focusing on the outcome. You've got to focus on the process in order to achieve the outcome. You might remember from our interview with Joe Billingham when I told him I'd heard he'd set a goal of buying 1 house per month. He corrected me. His goal was actually to own £1 million worth of property, and he'd worked out that to do this before he turned 30, he'd need to buy 1 house per month. So if you wanted to make saving a routine, think about the first and smallest action you could take. Saving £1 per day isn't going to give you financial freedom, but it does cast a vote for being the type of person that saves. We could spend forever thinking about what to do, but sometimes the very best thing we can do is take action, any action, even the smallest.
Think of each habit as a sequence of actions. It's not one thing. It may be one big thing, and then figure out what the very first thing in that sequence is that is simple to do. It doesn't really take much willpower. It doesn't get harder. It's the simple way that the thing starts. And it's kind of like magic. If you can really start doing that simple thing every day, assuming we're talking about a daily habit, the whole rest of the habit will follow. It's amazing. Like you think it requires a great effort of will and planning to take on a large habit, but actually you can do the whole thing by just starting the simplest action.
Whatever you think you can do or believe you can do, begin it. Action has magic, grace, and power in it.
Part of this is in coming up with a plan, and then part of it is what you do every day. But as far as coming up with your plan for your habit, I think the next thing you need to do is think about a cue. That's the second step. And that is, how are you going to know when to do that one first simple action? You either have to have something that gives you a nudge, like an alarm, or you have to have it tied to a very specific time and place in your day. So every day you brush your teeth before you go to bed. Every day when you wake up, you go into the shower. So you have a time that something happens, and then you have the next thing that happens after that.
The key thing here is to make the cue effortless. You have to have something that's a natural reminder that will pop up in your face and say, now's the time to start. The best cues are part of a natural sequence of events, and when it comes to building better financial habits, there are so many apps available today that automate everything, making it effortless for us to save. The real trick is to avoid spending. The same steps that help us build habits can also help us break them. So, if you want to break a spending habit, identify the cue that triggers you to spend money on the things you don't want to.
I call it reducing friction. And all I mean by that is you want to set up your life such that when the cue happens, the next thing that happens is your first action, but not that you have to do a bunch of things then from that cue until when you start. So a common example is people who want to, say, learn a new instrument. And so they'll set up a cue, and then once they want to start their practice, they've got to go, okay, I got to figure out my guitars in the closet. I got to go get some music over here and set up my stand and the chair and what have you. What you really want to do is have all that stuff set up. So when your cue happens, you put your butt in the chair and you start practicing.
Building better savings habits sounds great, but it takes willpower to make change, and willpower is limited. You only have so much energy you can use to fight bad decisions. So how can you make it easier on yourself? How do you make good saving or spending habits your default? It's simple. By designing your environment to make good choices the easiest choices to make, because your environment often influences your desires. The things that are on your desk at home, your kitchen counter, your office at work, they influence your behaviors. We want things simply because they're an option, simply because they're in front of us at the time. But you don't have to be the victim of your environment, you can also be the architect of it. You can design something to make your good behaviors easier and your bad behaviors harder. So if you can restructure your physical environment or your digital environment, then you're more likely to actually stick with the right habit. This way, you don't have to rely on willpower and self-control. It's a lot easier to stick to better habits when you're presented with better options. You want to make good habits effortless and make bad habits require an effort.
Step 4 is to give yourself an aligned reward. The truth is that as people get into whatever habits whatever habit it is they're trying to get moving, the habit tends to self-reinforce. There's a reason that you're doing it, or there are reasons behind what you're doing. And as you get into it, you don't necessarily need to give yourself a piece of candy every time you do it. It will reinforce itself. However, those kind of rewards tend to be more in the long-term scope, and this is part of the reason people struggle so much with their habits, because we're very short-term reward oriented. So it can be helpful to set up some kind of a reward that when you're just getting started, to get you into the practice of doing something on a daily basis. And it doesn't really matter so much what it is, as long as it's something you enjoy and it's not something that's going to undermine what it is that you're currently doing.
If you're trying to build a savings habit, rewarding yourself by blowing a load of cash isn't going to help. As Jeff would say, you can't give yourself ice cream for doing your workout.
Don't do something that's going to mess you up on the next day. One of the big steps you can take is to set up a consequence for not doing your habit the way that you've planned it. And there are whole services online that are providing this kind of setup. But basically, it works like this: if you, and it's not like if you trip that this is going to go. This is like if you stop doing your habit, if you really fail at what you've set out to do, then it triggers some kind of a consequence. And you have to figure out what that consequence would be. That's something meaningful to you, but people use they get creative with this sort of stuff. Like maybe you've got a very embarrassing photo of yourself, running around, naked, or what have you. And you set this up with somebody you trust to not abuse it, but also that you trust will follow through if they say they're going to. So you say, okay, I'm giving you this photo. Don't show it to anybody else. But if I have to tell you every week, like I have to report to you what I have done to start my habit every day. And if I don't do it, you post this thing up on Instagram. Or maybe I'm going to set up, like I'm going to write like a $5,000 check to a political candidate that I despise. And if I fail to tell you this, then you're going to take that check and you're going to drop it in the mail. And so you have to figure out what's personal to you. And the key is it's just got to be something you really, truly would hate to have happen. And then you put it in your own hands to make sure that it does not. So it's sort of this thing that hangs over your head while you start the habit on a daily basis.
If you're serious about changing a habit, this really does work well. The key here is to set up a negative consequence that's meaningful to you.
The next one is a little bit more on the psychological side, but it's also very practical in that you need to think about what you're trying to change, what it means for your identity. And it's because a lot of times people are driven to try to change their habits by things they've seen online and friends and media and shows and everything else. And they have this concept like, yeah, I'd like to be whatever. I'd like to be skinny. I'd like to be strong. I'd like to be, a writer. I'd like to be whatever habit is you're trying to start. And they have a kind of like a vision of that sure would be great. And that's an identity that appeals to them. Like I could say, I am a writer, I'm a lifter, I'm a what have you. But there's also a very behavioral component to that. Like in order to be that person, you have to be the kind of person who does blah, blah, blah. So if I'm going to be a person who writes every day, I need to be the kind of person who goes to sleep at a certain time, wakes up at a certain time, does this thing every day, and that's my life. That's my lifestyle in order to make that happen. Like people who write every day, this is what they do. Like there's not exceptions to it. Like that is what needs to happen. And so it's good to be able to say, like, I'd like to be the type of person who does this, this, and this, and actually write that out. And then in column A is I currently am the kind of person who does blah, 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 which is not those things. You know, this is who I am right now. I'm the kind of person who, you know, stays up late at night. I'm the kind of person who likes to binge watch Netflix instead of go to sleep. I'm the kind of person who likes to sleep in. And there's a kind of decision point that needs to happen there. And it doesn't, it's something you can think about this decision on a daily basis for a while, but you have to consider, is that the kind of person I really want to be? Do I, you know, am I going to be comfortable with that, giving up this certain identity in order to get this certain identity? Any sort of a habit is both what it is you want to be and then what it is you have to give up. And that conflict is where people tend to drop whatever habit they're trying to do, because they haven't really embraced what kind of person you need to be to do that thing that you're trying to change into. And they're not willing to give up the kind of person they are in order to get there.
This has to be one of the most important steps when it comes to building better financial habits, and one of the hardest. A lot of us want better financial security, but we're unwilling to embrace the change in identity that this requires. You want to be the kind of person who saves money, you have to become the kind of person that doesn't spend a lot of money. And if you want real wealth, be so busy making money that you don't have time to spend it.
If you end up embracing the identity, change happens. If you don't embrace the identity, your current and old identity will always work against what you're trying to do, and it always wins. I use what lots of other people who talk about habits use, which is I like to have like a calendar that sits in front of my face, so I can't avoid it. I sit down at my desk and it's like stuck right there on my wall, just a piece of paper calendar that I printed out. And when I do that first action, when I'm done with it, I put a big X on the day. That's it.
Yeah.
And so as you move through your first weeks of trying to begin a new habit, those X's become a chain, and whether it's a daily habit or a weekly or whatever, like it's a pattern that emerges. And there's something very appealing about keeping that pattern going. You don't want to break that little chain. So it's helpful both in terms of knowing how it's going, but it adds like a certain cue in your environment, and like reinforcement, it's a reward. And so it's a very simple thing, but it actually helps tie it all together.
I love this idea. When you're using apps or alarms on your phone, it's so easy to ignore. It's way better to have something that's in your face all the time and works as its own cue. When I started one of my first businesses, it involved a lot of cold calling, and I hate cold calling. So I used to set a target for the day, and when I hit that target, I take a big red pen and cross it off on my window. It gave me a great sense of accomplishment, and I'd see that momentum building up over the weeks. All right, thank you so much for that, Jeff. That was really helpful. So for people that want to learn more about building better habits, how can they find out more about this or get in touch with you?
Yeah, the easiest way would be to go to my website, which is a new thing I just put up recently. It's buildhabitsthatstick.com. And there you can download a document I've created with these 7 steps that, puts them into a checklist form for you and gives you a lot of the detail we've been talking about today, and a case study is in there. And it's free. Just go there and put in your email and you can download it there.
Okay, YouTube, you heard it here first. If you're interested in building better financial habits, or any habit for that matter, smash that like button, then go check out buildhabitsthatstick.com. Link in the description. Jeff's put together a free PDF that goes into way more detail than we could in this video. Check it out. That's a wrap.